now.
Yeah,
Very good.
great. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to start this off by welcoming everyone and saying Happy New Year. And I think since we've got two speakers today, I'm not going to say very much at all, except that a new year is a chance to start all over with more hope and more energy. So let's hope we can go forward with smiles on our face and strengthen our spirits. And so, Carol, it's your turn.
I too will wish everybody Happy New Year, and I am excited to hear what our three speakers today are going to say. At the last minute, Stewart added somebody else, but she is well known to all of us. He added Berkeley Allen. And so we're going to have a league state perspective. We're going to have our lobbyist perspective, and then we're going to have our council person at large talk a little bit about things that are happening in our own hometown here. You don't need introductions really for any of these people. Debbie Gould is the state president, and we are delighted to have her address the issue of what's going on with redistricting in the state as far as she knows. Stewart Clifton is our boots on the ground, probably as much, if not more than anybody else, because he haunts the halls of the Capitol on a regular basis. And Berkeley has been involved in Nashville metro government, goodness gracious, for 4, 8, 10 years, Berkeley, is that right?
Longer than that.
Well, as a council member for 10 years now, that's right.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And he's been involved in Nashville for a whole lot longer than that. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie at this point and let her begin to let us hear what she knows about what's going on here.
Right. Well, thanks, Carol. And it's always fun to talk about this topic since the 2020 census, we have been talking about redistricting. And from the very beginning, the state league said we were going to have modest goals as to what we could do to have an impact on redistricting in the state. And that our goals would be to increase both the transparency in the process and increase public engagement. And so there have been some modest changes that have happened during this redistricting cycle. The legislature is the one who is legally responsible for handling it in our state. And the two committees, the House Committee and the Senate Committee on Redistricting, both for the very first time created bipartisan committees. And that's a big deal. And it's a really wonderful legacy to have going forward. It was also a big deal that although there weren't very many committee meetings, we were allowed, along with other people, to make public comments at them. And so the league actually made public comments at 3 of these committee meetings. So, you know, that in our glass full, glass empty kind of metaphor, maybe we're a quarter of the way full. Okay. So those were really positive. But the one thing that we really thought was important in the legislative process was let's have redistricting hearings across the state to hear from the public, to hear what constituents really wanted to see in terms of the redistricting process where they felt they would be well represented. And we were disappointed that there was no response on that. So as you may recall, earlier this year in the fall, we partnered with NAACP and Civic Tennessee and held 3 redistricting hearings across the state in Chattanooga, Memphis, and Clarksville, and took that information, direct information we heard from the public, and gave that to the committees to help inform their decisions. And also to help us draw a map. We drew a congressional map based on what we heard. And what we heard was really clear. It was people wanted to have their counties represented as a whole. Keep counties together was heard across the state. And the other thing was that urban communities wanted urban representation and rural communities wanted rural representation. In other words, They want people representing them who truly understand their needs and truly can reflect what they need as constituents in passing legislation. So where are we now? Well, there are three maps. There's a Tennessee House map, a Tennessee Senate map, and a US congressional map that are drawn. So far, we have seen the House map, at least in rudimentary form, because on December 17th, the State House Redistricting Committee passed the map that they had drawn that would redraw all 99 of the House representative districts for the state. And as you know, West Tennessee lost population. There's a lot of move toward Middle Tennessee, so particularly South Nashville and the surrounding counties. Rutherford, Williamson, Sumner all saw big jumps in population. So we knew that there were going to be a lot of shifts, and unfortunately, a lot of it seems to have played out in some partisan ways. But not surprising, because it is a political process, and incumbents like to protect incumbents, as Stewart will be happy to tell us. And so what we know is that there were 5 races in the state where incumbents were paired against each other, which, you know, normally means under the big scheme of things, one of them's a loser, right? And of those 5 races, one of them was a Republican district in East Tennessee. Jerry Sexton and Rick Eldridge are paired against each other in the way the new maps are drawn. And then in the urban areas, we see 4 races where incumbents were paired. In Knox County, Gloria Johnson is being paired against Sam McKenzie. In Shelby County, London Lamar is paired against Tory Harris. And in Davidson County, we have 2 races with incumbents paired against each other. John Ray Clements and Mike Stewart are both drawn in the same map, redistricting map, and Vincent Dixie and Bo Mitchell are paired together. So it's disappointing in the sense that we've had some strong Davidson County delegation representing our community, and we will certainly be losing some of those incumbents. So that's kind of, you know, that is now going to go through the next step in the process, which is to go to the Public Service Committee vote for approval as it moves forward. And to be quite honest, I think Stewart can talk more about that in just a minute, but I suspect that pretty much what we see is what we'll get on that. And that leaves 2 other races that we are waiting to hear about because we haven't seen the maps yet. They will be presented next week on January 12th at 10 a.m. And you all are welcome to watch this live stream, and the House Redistricting Committee will be holding that meeting then. They will be showing the Senate maps that they're drawing, and they will also be showing the congressional maps then. And I think everybody has heard the same rumors that I've heard. I don't know anymore. Stewart again may have more information on this, but the rumors that we've heard is that there certainly is a likelihood that Davidson County will be divvied up into different congressional districts. And this is really a monumental change for our community if this were to happen. It's the first time it would be divided up since, I don't know, Civil War days, or was it pre-Civil War days? I can't recall. But it also, not only is this a difficulty in terms perhaps of political alignments, which of course we don't need to get into as a nonpartisan group, as much as to say it's really bad for our community because of the fact that Davidson County as a whole is an economic driver. It is a healthcare center. It is a tourist mecca. It is a transportation hub for Middle Tennessee. And it is first and foremost an urban community surrounded by suburban and rural counties. So again, that message that we heard from across the state, keep counties together, have urban areas represented by urban representatives, is in danger of being altered by these political considerations, if indeed Davidson County is divided up. And again, I don't want to get too far ahead of things because we don't know yet, and we won't know until next week when that happens. So that's sort of where things stand now, except I should mention one other thing. Normally at this point, someone says, well, what about legal challenges? What are the possibilities of legal challenges? And what we do know is that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 has been slowly eviscerated by Supreme Court rulings. And at this point, really the only legal challenges that hold up are if you can show that there was intentional effort made to minimize minority votes. And I leave it to others to identify whether that could possibly be true in Davidson County. What we do know is there's likely a case in West Tennessee, in Fayette County, where there clearly seems to be some reason to think that it was an intentional effort to dilute minority vote in Fayette County. And indeed, so NAACP is probably going to pursue that. And actually, one of the county commissioners actually stated during a meeting, he says, I don't understand why we need to care about minorities. We never did before. So perhaps not the best quote to take into court with you. So anyway, that is really where things stand from what I know. And I will turn this over to Stewart to tell us what he sees in his crystal ball coming, going forward from then. But I really would encourage people to watch the video next week, the live stream, and to also tell you, if you're thinking of going to the state legislature, you should assume that it will be a maskless event for most people. So take that into consideration if you're thinking of going there.
Where is the video available?
It is, okay, so if you go to the state website for the legislature, each committee has, you can pull down them from the menu, the committee, which would be the House Redistricting Committee. And when you pull down that part of the menu, you will see a little icon that says video, and just click on that and it's live streamed from there. If you have problems, let me know and I'll be happy to walk you through it more thoroughly.
Debbie, someone has posted it in the chat box.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Wonderful. Okay. Well, Stewart, I turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much. And thanks for everyone for being on this. This is a rather large turnout. And I appreciate it, especially seeing some names I have known for years, but not always on league things. Let's see. Am I being heard okay? There seems to be a little bit of background noise. No? Okay.
You're fine, Stewart.
Okay, great. I'll start by thanking Sophia Casto, who is my associate and on the call today, and who, as usual, has prepared me to be able to do a maybe moderately decent job on this topic. Thank you, Sophia, for your work on helping to put this information together. I would like to follow up a little bit about redistricting, not in any great detail, because Debbie has, of course, done a great job. Obviously, there were, both parties had folks put in the same districts, but it's worth noting that sometimes there was an explanation for that. I'll point out that in Davidson County, Clemens, Potts, and Stewart are in the same district. The reason we don't talk about Potts so much is that he announced last year that he was not interested in running again. So essentially, the people drawing the maps figured that that would be a way they could do that without hurting any incumbent. But we do have two fairly long-term incumbents in the same district, as you've heard. Glenn Cassidy, the former speaker, had already announced he was not going to run. So when he was put in the same district with Sam Whitson, a very, frankly, a very impressive Republican from Williamson County, that was expected because that was a way not to retire an incumbent. And in Memphis, I'll just point out that last year, for the first year that I think I've ever heard of, Tennessee elected 2 openly gay representatives, one Republican from Knoxville and one Democrat from Shelby. And the Democratic representative has now been Tory Harris has now been drawn into Representative London Lamar's district, who is also a fairly new representative. So one of those will be gone barring litigation. This is about 2022, but I did want to mention 3 or 4 things about 2021, just to kind of give you a reminder or an introduction on 4 particular items, 4 particular bills that tell a little bit about the process, and I thought might be worth starting with. One is a bill that was meant to, and these aren't necessarily our priority bills, but they are bills that sort of illustrate things. There was a bill to crack down on homeless people close to interstate exits. An interesting bill that came out of a county that wanted to, where the legislator wanted to keep people from camping close to interstate exits or asking for money, which is those of you in Nashville know that does happen, and sometimes it's well organized, and it happens through the contributor being sponsors of some of that. And it was clearly to sort of shut that down so people didn't have to see homelessness. That bill we all expected it to go sailing through. It did not go sailing through. It got flat out killed by an organized group of faith-based supporters of homeless rights and homeless services. Just got killed. So I thought you might be interested in that, since so much of the news about our legislators and legislature is not going to be positive, in my opinion. Secondly, there was the bill to felonize protest. And that bill obviously was going to pass. It was to redefine some things about obstructing traffic and things like this and make felonies out of certain kind of protest activities. That bill was sailing through and went to the Senate committee, Judiciary Committee, and a Black activist from Nashville, Justin Jones, spoke about how didn't think it was a good idea to do that it could cut both ways and it was not the right thing to do, and that we had something called the Tea Party a few years ago where people could have been arrested if this had been the law then, because they broke out windows and Capitol, things like that. The bill was unanimously defeated in committee after his speech, with strong support of the chair, who had been at those Tea Party protests as a participant. Both of those to say, we never know. We may think we can predict what kind of bill could be passed and could be stopped. We don't actually know that, because sometimes organized work and sometimes a lot of luck can make a huge difference. Third item was the attempted impeachment of Ellen Hobbs Lyle, one of Tennessee's best trial level judges, a chancellor here in Davidson County, first appointed by a Republican governor, prominently recognized by all folks in the legal profession as one of our best ever. And because of her ruling in a case where I think we were a party regarding voting rights, the legislature decided, the overwhelming majority of the legislature decided to impeach her and convict her of impeachment. They did not. The bill had 67 sponsors in the House, which was most all of the Republicans, except Republican lawyers. The Republican lawyers, in a rather amazing feat of organizing and compromising, managed to kill a bill in committee that had 67 sponsors out of however many Republicans there are, or something like that. I may be off on a few of those. But that bill didn't get out of committee. It was killed. Now, some of us know Chancellor Lyle and knew she was going to retire anyway because of where she is in her career, and her husband Walter Kurtz is retired years ago. So she is going to retire, but that was not why the bar and the lawyers in the House decided that that was not the right thing to do. They just thought it set a terrible precedent. So those are three items that you might not have noticed as we were going through last year. The fourth item is a matter called critical race theory, which did get passed. It was not called that exactly in the bill itself, but it was to essentially provide a way for people to investigate and eventually possibly terminate teachers or otherwise sanction them if they had taught something, many people interpreted it as something more narrow. But those of us who questioned that bill, all of us knew that in practice it would be a way to discipline teachers for raising issues about race. And we've already had teachers fired in Tennessee for things that do not seem to be related to anything except pointing out history. So it's about as bad as we thought it was going to be. Anyway, those are four things from last year. I'll now move on to what I was supposed to talk about, which is 2022. And this is by design not a PowerPoint because there's just a lot to go over. I'm leaving it up to Carol to ask questions as we go through or at the end, however she wants to. And I will be glad to ignore them if I don't think I have anything to say. Elections and voting. So there were all sorts of good and bad things that were discussed. Some passed, some did not. Everything from absentee voting boxes, placement, optical scanners, photo IDs for registering, restoration of voting rights in various ways, non-resident property owners being given the right to vote, easing requirements for getting new parties on the ballot, and that's a specific initiative of libertarians, addressing recent party rules that mandate filing fees for primary candidates, which we've never really had before, modifying rules regarding voting convenience centers. A bill that's getting a lot of attention right now is Bruce Griffey's bill, who's a very conservative Republican not running again, to outlaw voting machines and require paper ballots. Or it may in fact simply require a paper trail for ballots, which half the state already does, and which our league has a long history with and is in favor of the paper trail. So it depends on what you're reading. He's unusual, but it's not entirely clear whether what he's talking about will be a bill that would require would outlaw voting machines in place of paper. So sometimes not everything you read is true, but clearly that bears watching. So those are a bunch of bills about elections and voting. Most of them don't have bill numbers. Very few bills have been filed since last year, and most of those bills that are back from last year will not go forward, even though they could technically. Healthcare, always a major priority of the league. Although I have to say that we have different categories of priorities, and I think Debbie would vouch for the idea that for several years we've got priorities and then real big priorities. Election/voting and open government are our perennial big priorities because of heritage and because of knowledge base and things like that. So those two are our biggest, but they're not our only priorities, obviously. And those priorities are dealt with at the state level by the league and implemented through our advocacy committee and things like that. So healthcare, I know we're interested in, and it is a priority. There's the Medicaid expansion issue has been a really tragic thing over the years. There will be, I think I mostly just want to mention it because I'm reasonably sure from some work I've done with groups that there will be a bill this year with Republican sponsors we think, in the House and Senate to expand Medicaid. There is a lot of, it would not be surprising to those of us who are for such a thing to see it not go very far, but having a bill to allow the issue to remain in people's consciousness and give people something to organize around and talk to people about seemed important to a lot of advocates. So that will be back. And another item on healthcare that we know about is block grants. That's really not a legislative issue, but I mentioned it because it's up at the federal level. I do not think we'll hear much more discussion about block grants at the state level because there's really no action that remains to be taken at the state level. A lot of other healthcare issues, one more specific issue that could have some possibility for being good is a lot of folks are interested in reentry of people who've been incarcerated. Very hard to do that without healthcare. There's been some thought that there might be some targeted approach to that issue. So we will see how that goes. These are in no particular order, by the way, of priority. The environment is one that I'm bending the rules a little bit about because we're not just talking about state issues here, since this is the local league, the Nashville League, which has an active environment committee. We're going to talk briefly about the environment at the local level. The issues about that could be the very current one of curbside recycling, emissions testing, and then an upcoming major bill about trees and forests that'll be filed in January in the Metro Council. But I did want to bring up those first two. Curbside recycling has been in the news quite a bit because we don't have it anymore, at least temporarily in Nashville. I'm not sure if what action steps we may want to take. You know the history that it was stopped because a private company that was doing garbage pickup, not recycling pickup, is going bankrupt and couldn't find workers to do it. And rather than let garbage pile up in everyone's alleys and cans and backyards for week after week, which has certain negative aspects to it from a public health standpoint, the city decided to use Metro employees who had been doing curbside recycling stuff to work on this, on the trash. I put that in there to just give a little perspective on it. We all know curbside recycling is one small way to help and rather insignificant in many ways compared to the more important values of reducing and reusing. And but I think all are interested in that issue. So it's something we'll see if our local league and its environment committee want to address in some way. It gives me the opportunity to say that in many ways, our city is in fact a little bit cutting edge right now, even with that setback. We do have a sustainability office. We do have a mayor who has signed on to and is part of an international group of sustainable people committed to sustainable cities and things like this. And there's quite a bit of, I think, sensitivity to this at the Metro Council level, which brings me to Berkeley Allen and emissions testing, which, as many of us have been hearing, is now going away in Nashville. And there's a reason for that. Some of it's okay, and some of it's probably not. But Berkeley, thank you for agreeing to be part of this. I know you're going to be on this call before I called you, but thanks for being willing to address this and put it in a quick perspective for us about what's going on with emissions testing.
Yeah, happy to do that. And y'all give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. My computer is, okay, great. I'll talk loud. So on Tuesday night, the council did vote to end the emissions testing as of the end of this month. And that was after we had delayed that a little bit to allow the health department to kind of educate us on how the emissions testing program fits into our overall air quality program. And what we learned was that program was started 40 years ago when car emission standards were much lower. And that coupled with an increase in the strictness of emission standards has been very successful in improving air quality in Nashville over the decades. This came about, I think, partly because as many things, including our curbside recycling and our trash pickup, have been affected by employment issues and just not being able to get people to show up for work. The lines for the emissions testing station had gotten painfully long and people were really unhappy with it. And I think that kind of brought to the forefront, is this program really providing the benefit for the nuisance that it seems to be to everyone? And that's unfortunate, because there have been times when it's worked very efficiently, but currently it really has been a major ordeal to go through. So with that kind of scrutiny on it, the health department came to us, and if I were really sophisticated, I would have pie charts that I could show you, but there are in the health department's annual reports pie charts that show where the sources of pollution are for the different types of pollutants. And this was all about smog, which is what Los Angeles is famous for having all the time, but Nashville does at certain times of year have a brown haze over downtown, and that is caused mostly by vehicles more than anything else. Power plants are not the bad guys in this case, it's vehicles. And this testing program has helped reduce that for passenger cars to the point where while the vehicles are still over half of that pie chart, the passenger cars are now a third of that maybe. And it's the big long haul trucks and things like that that are really causing the big issue on that. And so the reduction from the few cars that fail, that then are required to go back and improve how their cars are operating, calculated by Metro Health, was going to be such a tiny percentage of our overall emissions being polluted into the air, that they acknowledged that the program has kind of outlived its usefulness. That the car emission standards, for the most part, are performing a much greater proportion of that. So based on that information, the council members agreed that that program maybe has done what it needed to, and now we need to turn our focus to other things that can improve air quality. So what might be helpful to have advocates work for is to come back to the citizens and say, you're no longer having to spend, what currently is an hour or two in line, what can be only 15 minutes in line, and you're not having to spend $9 to go through the emissions process, but the state law allows us to hang on to $4 of that, and that could then be used to electrify our bus fleet, or to help fund transit. There are other things that we could use that funding for that would have a bigger impact on air quality than what the current emissions testing program is doing. Right now, the appetite for asking for money from the citizenship is really low. People are still kind of grumpy about a tax increase that happened a year or two ago. So we didn't choose to do it right on the backs of this thing, but we may, if we can build the support beforehand through groups like the League of Women Voters and some other groups that Stewart is involved in, Sierra Club, Tennessee Conservation Voters, if we can build the support beforehand, we might try to come back and attach that $4 that state laws allows to our vehicle registration fee or something like that. So that's an important thing for the league to be aware of, that your advocacy could be instrumental in making successful. Anything else you want me to say, Stewart?
Well, that's a great summary, and probably some things people didn't know about. There's a lot more we could say, but I know most of us wanted a state focus. I just thought that was important for this local group, since there's so many interesting environmental things going on. Some not so good, some not terrible. So in order to kind of move forward, unless there is a highly specific question for fairly specific question for Berkeley, I think maybe we should.
Can I add one thing about the recycling?
Yes.
And that is just to assure people that I have every reason to think the curbside recycling will return soon. Part of this is just a supply chain issue that neither our contractor nor Metro can get parts for our trucks, or the new trucks that we've ordered, or the rental trucks that we've ordered, are all taking longer to get here than they would under normal circumstances. But there are rental trucks on the way, and there are new pickup trucks. I mean, trucks for picking up trash and recycling on the way. So when those arrive, then we will have the capacity to restore the curbside recycling. So it's not gone forever. I just want people to be assured of that. Okay, thanks.
Stuart, let me jump in at this point because there are a couple of questions directed specifically at you and your knowledge. One is from Ann Carr, and she says, Stuart, are there resolutions regarding constitutional amendments filed and pending from last year that are of concern?
You know, Ann has made a career out of asking me questions I haven't studied up on enough, but it's a very good question, a very logical question, and I did not actually focus a whole lot on that, and I don't know. Most of you know that it's very hard to amend our state constitution. It has to be done in two separate legislatures after elections and stuff. It feels like there probably are some that are worth being worried about, but I'll try to get back to this group and to Ann later on that, unless somebody knows. Debbie may know, others may know.
I don't recall what's going to be. What I do know is that there are going to be in 2022. There are going to be 3 constitutional amendments on the ballot.
Already.
Yeah. And one of them has to do with if the governor has an infirmity, how he's replaced. I don't recall the other one is pretty pedestrian. And then the third is the right to work. Isn't it this year? Isn't it the right to work this year, Stewart?
Yeah, it has to pass again this year. Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think this is at the point where, no, I think that those are the 3 that will be on the voters ballot. But I don't recall.
I'm not sure if right to work has been through 2 separate elected legislators.
You know, I think we're just going to have to go back and read up on these.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just can't recall.
All right.
All right. This is Dick Williams. I think the third one might be dealing with the language in the Constitution about no prisoning, something about getting around slavery by talking about prisoners.
Yeah.
Remember, Stuart, the
Yeah.
technicality.
Right. We'll look at that and get a report to some folks.
It's kind of meaningless, but it cleans up the language.
Right. But in the interest of comprehensiveness, we ought to kind of get that before people. Dick, it's good to see you. We miss you at the legislature.
And Stuart, this is the other question. Well, actually, I keep on getting all kind of posts here, but Liza Ramage has this question for you. Could you comment on the possibilities you see for educational funding or redoing BEP?
I will in just a few minutes. I've got that
Okay,
further
great.
on in the presentation. Okay, there are other local and state environmental things, including one that I just teasingly put out there. There's about to be a rather major bill at the Metro Council dealing with trees and forest from what I consider to be a very good point of view. We won't go into the details of that, but it may be something that our local league environment committee will want to be aware of soon. Going on other potential environmental things at the state level, we're looking at a potential for some bills that we have to watch, depending on what they say, dealing with quarries, with how to, filling quarries, and the state taking away local authority to regulate that. There is a very strong movement going to pass a concept and implementing legislation for something called Clean Tennessee, which is a very broad concept, but eventually part of the reason for this effort, which is now being studied by TASER and which is supported by every aspect of the state environmental world, including Tennessee Wildlife Federation, which is a hugely important one, is to deal with long-term environmental issues and conservation issues, and maybe even for some of us dealing with something called extended producer responsibility, which if you haven't heard that phrase, I think you will at some point. It's to make manufacturers and distributors responsible for their products and packaging at the end of life of that product, providing incentives to industry and such things as that. That's not an issue that will be debated at the legislature this year because it's being studied by TASER, and that specific issue is only one part of the whole Green Tennessee type approach, but it's worth noting because it has the possibility of a clean Tennessee approach. It has the support of every part of the environmental world right now. Education. Yes, we're now getting to Liza's question. We're in the middle of a BEP process. January 14th is the last day for public comment on this BEP revision process that some of you, I hope, have been involved in. And they're still taking comments from individuals, but only through the 14th. And it's had a lot of criticism about this whole process. We don't really know what it's going after, or what will come from it, or what the administration had in mind by calling it. But it will be worth following very carefully. One of the big issues, of course, is that there is many of us are pretty convinced that one of the basic issues is the lack of funding. It's almost everybody kind of gets that, but it's not at all clear whether this administration will see that as part of the whole issue of BEP revision and all of that. Again, I'm a generalist. Many of you on this call can and may wish to, although our time is moving on, can and may wish to sort of elaborate on that for folks. Is there anyone on the call who wants to very specifically address that education reform issue? Oh, besides the January 14th day, I will mention one specific issue that a lot of us are very interested in. Is the issue of social workers and other mental health professionals, which seem to be dramatically underused in the school system. And there's a lot of support for that, not just from progressive groups, a lot of support for increasing that. And it leads me to say on a positive note that, it seems to have some strong support and understanding from our state mental health department, which remains one of our better state departments under the leadership of our commissioner. So did anyone want to break in here on the education reform issue, like Liza or Robert or anybody?
Well, there's just so much at stake, and it's such a big thing. I know something that many of us had been worried about is that it's a backdoor way to support vouchers. Right. The governor did say on video that was a completely separate issue and they had nothing to do with each other. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to begin, but we can just all hope that there's a positive outcome, at least on some levels. Everybody needs more money. Districts need to end up with choices about how they use the money for the districts that they are. The nurses, counselors, and social workers has been pretty popular for a couple years in the legislature, so we hope that's something that will pass. But just to give you an idea of what is not funded in Tennessee by the state, if you're interested, technology is not funded. Professional development for teachers is not funded at this current time. And class sizes have become way too big. We need to be able to pay teachers enough to retain teachers. But we'll see. We'll see. Thank you.
And there is much more that could be said. So thank you, Liza. And I'm sure you'd be happy to get calls from people. And I know you're working with the group actively trying to deal with all of those issues. So thanks for your work there. Which brings us, of course, to the next topic of what were you saying?
Let me pop back in for a second because we've got several comments in the chat box about issues that are going on in regard to BEP and into a couple of other things too. So I'm going to start with A. Stewart, can you repeat the name of who's doing the research for Clean Tennessee legislation?
Oh, I don't think I actually mentioned who's doing the real research. By the way, this is an issue for us to be aware of. It probably will not have a legislative vehicle this year. It's just an ongoing process under the leadership actually of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, which is made up of hunters and fishermen primarily, who obviously care about this and have the added advantage of being predominantly Republican, which is helpful in this day and age. I don't want to go into much more detail right now in the interest of time, but TASSER is doing a study, which is a very reputable group, Tennessee Advisory Council on Intergovernmental Relations. And it's not that we're asked, I'm just bringing this up, not because there'll be a resolution this year, but to let you know that there are long-term and fairly sophisticated efforts going on broad issues of resources and using of resources.
FYI, Jamie Oakley posted a URL for BEP review. And so if you're interested in seeing what's going on there, go to our chat box and look at what she posted. Another comment about lack of school nurses and social workers and therapists. And if anybody has any thoughts about that, you might post it over in the chat box. Again, saving time. So we're not taking up a whole lot of Stewart's time. But let's move on at this point.
Okay, thank you. Some of you may know this and may not, but I also represent the National Association of Social Workers Tennessee chapter, and we are not happy about how few social workers we have, particularly in rural areas. And some of the problem is the pay is not enough to bring people willing to go, who are willing to do that. But much is going to happen on that, which brings us obviously to the next issue of broadband. Well, maybe it's not so obvious, but it has such implications. It's an issue that the league has had a position on for many years, and there are issues. It's at the forefront of things now. COVID was a great game changer about broadband. It's made it much more critical with the wide usage of telemedicine with federal and state money available. But we still have two states, one with broadband access and one without. And there are issues that will come up in the state level. It's again not maybe our top two issues, but we're following it. We do have a position. We think it should be equitable. And I'm going to ask for Jack McFadden, who is a league member, local league member, to make a comment or two real quick. Jack, are you still with us?
I am, Stewart. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I, for another group, tend to track regulatory and policy developments regarding information technology, broadband. So that's where I come across other information. It was interesting last year that we were tracking some potential broadband legislation, none of which, correct me if I'm wrong, ever, made it through a process and, to any kind of a vote. But it was interesting that there seemed to be a reasonable consensus last year that it made sense to promote organizations being like local utilities, electric co-ops, even municipal networks or rural, providers of telecommunication services, that they be provided incentives to build out broadband to those areas that needed it. And that was an interesting kind of it almost seemed like a multi-party consensus there. Well, none of that ever, amounted to anything in the end as far as legislation goes. The difference this year to me, in my observation, and I'm just speaking for myself here, is that in the intervening time since last year, we've had a lot of federal legislation passed that addresses broadband and that is going to be directing funding to the states for the states to use to figure out how to deploy broadband better. So now the landscape to me seems to be that there's money coming the states' ways. And one of the things that's appearing is that trade groups are now preparing handbooks, playbooks to give to the states to help them kind of plan their approach to the disbursement of funds and how they organize around assessing broadband needs and where, you know, funding should be directed and so on. So I don't know if that's going to necessarily require any legislation on states' part. Seems to me it could be an administrative function of the executive branch. I don't know. But you know, that's, to me, that's the difference this
Good.
year. And the thing I'll be kind of trying to keep an eye on too is, you know, what are the forces being deployed to kind of help guide, shall we say, you know, the states and legislators and the executive branch.
Right. Thanks. It's something we're still getting our arms around, but the league has a longstanding concern with it, and it certainly impacts education, employment, healthcare, and it's an equity issue in terms of race and class as well.
And I'm sorry, just one of the things that was interesting to me is people who are familiar with Pew Charitable Trusts and the American Enterprise Institute would not necessarily think those groups to be allied all that often on positions, but they're both saying there is an urgent need for the states to improve their planning and implementation in preparation for this influx of broadband funds.
Okay, great. Thanks. I want to move to open government now, which is another one of our key perennial issues. We're a member of Tennessee Coalition for Open Government. We've had great success on this issue over the years, not always, but frankly, a whole lot of the time, the good guys win on open government for lots of reasons. It's not really a liberal conservative issue. Libertarians, for instance, and Tea Party folks, they really have a skepticism of public officials operating in secret, and so do a lot of us. So this is going to be a big deal this next year. We don't know exactly what vehicles there will be, but there are efforts to provide online meeting participation for board, city councils, and county commissions, where members could never show up in person with or without some kind of an excuse. Well, you know, in COVID, we've seen that you can in fact meet online without being in person, but think about the implications of that taken to the next level, where local commissions, local councils, local utility boards can meet without people can come to see their meeting, but they don't necessarily know if their person's going to be there. So there's an effort that's not the law right now, but there's a potential effort that legislators are going to try to relax requirements that people have to show up at least occasionally, and so that citizens can be part of that process and can look them in the eye sometimes. So anyway, that's just something we were able to modify a bill that was going through last year. Ultimately, it didn't pass, but you know, there's a way to do this without being too extreme and keeping the public from being able to interact with their elected officials. Another bill is to modify, another issue is modifying the State Public Records Act to clarify that a specific legal ground must be noted before a state or before a local government or state government entity refuses public access to records. You'd think that would be in the law, but there's not. You must give a reason, but it doesn't make it clear that it has to be some legal ground. And this will be a Tennessee Coalition on Open Government initiative, and we'll be part of that as a member of that group. Also, I think there's going to be an effort to require local governments, city and county governments to record and maintain video on websites. There's no requirement right now, but I believe the TCOG folks think this would be a great step forward. I'll mention that one of it's probably not going to be here this year, but something called the SLAP Act, the Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Policy Act, public participation. It's one of the League's great victories over the last few years. And I just want to remind people that we were part of this. For years and decades, businesses and even governments have used legal process to basically keep citizens from being actively involved. They have filed lawsuits which have no real basis, but because groups like ours, for instance, and others don't have the resources to fight them, they've been able to coerce things. Well, what we passed a few years ago with the League's support was a bill that shifts the fees, that a judge can at a very early stage before a lot of it's spent say, I've read all this is ridiculous. What the city's trying to do here, what this group is trying to do here is laughable, and I'm dismissing it at every single expense and lawyer fee of the citizen group or the prevailing side is going to be paid by you for bringing this ridiculous thing. So anyway, that's a long way of saying we won a big victory there. We've been able to keep it from eroding, and I just thought that was something we had never talked much about, but you might want to know about. Criminal justice and juvenile justice reform, I don't have a lot of specifics on it right now, but there's some really bad ideas out there that's not really reformed, like reestablishing state juvenile facilities, which take from everywhere and keep people away from their homes and families. We're watching the Department of Children's Services on that. I'm not sure where the League will be, but I just wanted to mention that that's an upcoming issue that we may want to know more about. And again, on a positive note, there is some sentiment in both parties and in the administration for reentry, for criminal justice reform. And that's something we don't know what form it will take and whether there'll be vehicles that could be supported this year, but that is maybe a positive thing. I spoke really quickly there for the last few things, and I think probably we have more questions. I'll go back and see if Carol has some she thinks I might be able to address.
Actually, we don't have any more questions right this second,
Good.
and it is 12:59. But with 100 people attending, I just want to tell everybody how excited I am that so many of you came out to hear what we delivered today. And all three of you did a wonderful job of bringing us up to date on things that are very important and very relevant to us, and the reason that we are in the League to begin with. And so thank the three of you very, very much. Debbie, thank you for all the work that you continuously do. Stewart, thank you for keeping us in the loop. And Berkeley, thank you for being one of ours also, who has been such a wonderful advocate for neighborhoods and for things that have to do with the folks right here in Nashville proper. I can't pass up the opportunity to tell you that we have two programs already scheduled, one for February and one for March. Our February program is actually thanks to Jack McFadden. It's Partners in Care. It's a pilot program that right now is providing social workers to ride with policemen in 2 precincts here in Nashville. And the social workers and mental health clinicians that go with the policemen are training policemen all over town about how to deal with mental health crises. And the results so far have been absolutely amazing. Robert Nobling, the executive director of Partners in Care, is going to be our speaker for the February meeting. And I think you're going to really enjoy what she has to say, because it addresses so many of the issues that people have been complaining about for as long as I can remember, about not having a way to deal with mental health crises. The second person that we've got coming in March is actually the vice provost at Vanderbilt, but she also is a well-known scholar in the area of presidential rhetoric. And I asked her name is Vanessa Beasley, and I asked her to come and speak to us about presidential rhetoric and January the 6th. She's done a lot of research in this area, and I know right this minute we may all be a little sick hearing about January 6th, but I think her perspective is going to be different than what we've been hearing, because she's a rhetorician by training, and her approach to this topic is looking at not only the past president's rhetoric, but other past presidents' rhetoric and our present president's rhetoric. So I think it'll be an interesting program that we've got scheduled. So keep on coming, folks. It's wonderful to see all of you, and I'll thank the snow for part of this, but I'll also thank COVID for part of this. And
Carol?
I'd love to be back in person, but we're just not. Yes, Stewart.
Well, I just want one last thing. I realize we're going over a couple of minutes, but I don't think people might want to know this. Someone did help me out with specific information about the ballot measures. We do have 3 pending amendments that will be on the ballot in 2022. Is everybody still with me?
I think so.
Okay, I just heard
Yes.
some. One of them is the right to work constitutional amendment, which we don't have time to discuss, but you've heard about it, and it has made it all the way to being on the ballot for 2022. Then the one that I think Dick was talking about involuntary servitude, which is sort of a housekeeping thing, but it's worth removing that language that allows the use of slavery as criminal punishment. And then third, an amendment to provide a line of succession to the governor if the governor becomes disabled. So it's those 3. Thanks. And thanks for everyone for participating.
We can't go with your question right now. I'm sorry, but Stewart, you might read Kent's question and let him know what you think.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll read it real quickly. What should we do about the HB 580, the CRT bill? We at NOAA are rallying against the bill either to repeal it or modify it to allow equity in curriculum. We're concerned about the bill's impact on teachers' comfort with teaching about racism, equitably teaching about Blacks' contribution to history, etc. Does anyone feel the bill can be repealed or changed, or are we just wasting our time? Maybe we just have to deal with it at a local level by monitoring and intervening when we think that the state has penalized a teacher or an administration unfairly.
Well, I'll be glad to talk more about that, but you should email me. I'm not the expert, but I can put you in touch with maybe some folks who would like to talk more about that. Stewart at stewartclifton.com, STEWART.
Thanks, Stewart, very, very much. And that concludes our meeting today. Thanks so much, folks. Bye now.
Thanks.